Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Hillside Club. Yay! I'm Arlene Baxter, and it is my pleasure to serve as the first vice president of the Hillside Club. I want to welcome those of you who are here physically in our beautiful clubhouse this evening, as well as those who are joining us by Zoom. This is our first hybrid event. As you can imagine, we got used to doing Zoom over the last year and a half, and that took some getting used to. Before that, for almost 100 years, we'd had presentations by experts and club members here in our clubhouse. And tonight we try that magic of combining those two platforms. And let me tell you, it is more than twice as difficult. So I want to give a special shout out to our immediate past president, Jim Fisher, our current president, Eric Allman, our club director of concerts and everything audio, Bruce Coble, for all of the work that they've put into making this happen. Thank you, gentlemen. This is a special event, not actually a fireside, but for the third year, I've been very proud to put together events that are part of Plastic Free July. That is an international movement to try to raise awareness about the harm that plastic has done to our world. In the last 2 years, we had partnered with the Ecology Center and focused on various aspects of the abundance of plastic alternatives, as well as recycling. Tonight, we move to, frankly, a more serious, a more elevated issue, which is PFAS and the physical harm that it is doing not only to our planet, but to our bodies. I'm very proud to be welcoming to our club a former member, someone who is well known in Berkeley as a scientist, as a mountaineer, and an activist. Arlene Bloom was very active in reducing and trying to eliminate toxins and fire retardants from children's sleepwear. She continues her activism in trying to educate us all about the harms of these forever chemicals. And with that, it's a real pleasure to welcome the other more esteemed Arlene Bloom, to the Hillside Club.
Well, thank you for that very gracious introduction, Arlene. You are a very eloquent Arlene also. And I'm really happy to be back here at the Hillside Club. Indeed, our institute, which we'll be learning more about, we had our wonderful 10th anniversary celebration here, and it's a wonderful venue, and I feel honored to be your first hybrid speaker. So we're going to be talking about reducing harm from PFAS for healthier people and planet. And let's see. My story begins at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. I see some Reed College graduates here in the audience, and that's where I became a chemist and a mountain climber. And I was doing both chemistry and mountain climbing when a friend died on a high peak in India, who was an early environmentalist. And I decided I wanted in his memory to do something for the environment. And I'd had someone named Bruce Ames, a famous biochemist, on my PhD committee at Berkeley. And I said, what can I do for the environment? And he said, well, there are these flame retardant chemicals, and they're like 10% of the weight of almost all children's pajamas. And I think they might get into the children and they might be harmful. So I found a little girl who had never worn these flame retarded pajamas because her mother bought her pajamas in England, and we put her in the pajamas, collected her urine. And the first morning she had breakdown products from the flame retardant in her urine. And every day she wore the pajamas, the level went up, and she stopped wearing them and the level went down. So the chemicals were going from the pajamas into the child. And in America, chemicals we put in our mouths, like foods, drugs, pesticides, are regulated, but other chemicals like flame retardants really aren't. So we knew the flame retardants got into the child. We ran a screen to see if they changed DNA. They were mutagens, and this flame retardant was one of the strongest mutagens that we'd ever tested. And like, oh my gosh, we have to tell the parents of America that all the kids are wearing these pajamas that are, 10% by weight, this very toxic flame retardant. And then I got invited to go to this mountain. Do you know what mountain this is? It's Mount Everest. And at that point, Everest had only been climbed once by Americans in 1963. This was 1976, the bicentennial expedition. And no American woman had even tried Everest. So I had an opportunity to be the first American woman to attempt Everest, or I needed to write the paper about the flame retardant pajamas. And I always like to, and this is fun, I get to talk to a real live audience. This hasn't happened for a year and a half, right? I've been Zooming too. It's so great to have real people. So how many of you, if you had that choice, would have gone to Mount Everest? And how many of you would have stayed and told the parents of America about the chemicals in the pajamas? So I did both. And while I climbed in these high, beautiful places, crossed big crevasses on ladders, every night I'd get to my camp and I'd write my paper. Here I am at my high point on Everest. This is 24,000 feet. And you can see I have my flag that says the mutants, and the Petri dish on the left doesn't have much tris, flame retardant, so there's not many colonies, and the one on the right has the flame retardant, so there's more colonies. Anyway, from 24,000 feet, I sent my paper by mail runner to Kathmandu, and it was published in Science magazine. And the subtitle is unusual for a scientific paper. If any of you have read scientific papers, they always end with the same recommendation. What is that? More study is needed. And here we did a couple experiments and we said the main flame retardant in children's pajamas is a mutagen and should not be used. And that's a very strong recommendation. And 3 months after we published our paper, and in those days, talk to the 3 TV networks. All you had to do was talk to 3 TV networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and everybody in America knew because that's where everybody got their news. 3 months after we talked to the network, wrote the paper, talked to the networks, tris was banned from kids' pajamas. And that was how things happened in those days. However, that was brominated tris that was banned. And I remember the summer after the ban, thinking, I wonder what's in pajamas now. So I rode my bike down to Penny's. Does anyone remember when Penny's was on Shattuck? And I bought pajamas in lots of different sizes. And the sales lady just beamed. She said, oh, you have such a nice big family, dear. And I thought, I felt like a super spy. And I took the pajamas back to the lab and I cut little strips of fabric from the seams because I thought these will be nice shower gifts for my friends. And I analyzed them. And they didn't contain brominated tris, they contained chlorinated tris, which was what's called a regrettable substitute. Similar instruction, structure, function, and harm. And so we wrote another paper. Chlorinated tris was banned from kids' pajamas, and I felt like the work was done. But little did I know at that time that they kept using chlorinated tris in other things like furniture. So like if anyone has a couch you bought between about 2005 and 2014, the foam in your couch might be about 5% chlorinated tris, the same chemical that was in the kids' pajamas, sadly. But I didn't know any of that. And I continued climbing. This is Annapurna. At that time, all the world's highest peaks, 8,000 meters, had been climbed by men, but women really hadn't had a chance. So I learned a lot on Everest, got a permit for Annapurna 1. It was the first 8,000 meter peak climbed. Maybe some of you know Maurice Harsag wrote a famous book about climbing Annapurna in 1950. And I thought it was the first 8,000 meter peak ever climbed. It must be one of the easiest and safest. And if any of you know about mountains, it's the most dangerous and the hardest, but we didn't know that, fortunately. So we had a team of women. We hired women Sherpas, and I put this picture in because of the t-shirts they're wearing. So Sylvia Paul, everybody knows Sylvia, right? So Sylvia dreamed up that slogan, "A woman's place is on top." And that made our fortune. We raised $80,000 selling those t-shirts, and that paid our way to Annapurna. So I wrote a book about that, Annapurna, A Woman's Place, and I have copies here today. Sylvia, it's only been helping sell these for about 45 years. And then I kind of had another big ambition, which was I wanted to visit all the beautiful places in the Himalayas, but to get from the plains to the Himalayas, there are these terrible switchbacking roads, and I get motion sick. So I thought, if I'm going to see the Himalayas, I don't want to be going up from the plains all the time. I want to walk all the way across. So I came up with the idea of walking across Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal, and India. And it's about a 10-month-long walk. And I met Hugh Swift, who had just finished writing a guide to the Himalayas. So he knew how to find the trails. I knew how to get the political permits because nobody had ever done this before. And we did. And we crossed high passes. This is our highest pass. It's about 20,000 feet. And then we would just drop down through terraced fields. And everywhere we seemed to arrive on a very auspicious day. This was the biggest archery festival of the year in Bhutan. This was the day that the Dalai Lama was giving a talk in English in Sikkim. You can see the young Dalai Lama. It was 1982. We entered Nepal on the Day of the Dog, when dogs were given marigold wreaths and special treats. And here we are in Ladakh in the Indian Himalayas for the annual mask dance festival for Buddha's birthday. So I came back from that trip. There'd been festivals all the way across the Himalayas. And I was at the Berkeley Arts and Crafts Fair, in Live Oak Park. And I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to transform Live Oak Park into a Himalayan festival? And we did. Have any of you been to the Himalayan Fair? So we started it after walking across the Himalayas. And there are 37 in 1982. And there were 37 successful Himalayan fairs. And then 2 years ago, it got rained out. And then, of course, last year it got COVIDed out. But there's going to be a Himalayan fair October 2nd and 3rd. So, and I'm going to say, if any of you want to sign my mailing list, I have a personal mailing list. I just send it three or four times a year. You can hear about the Himalayan Fair and other adventures and science. So I have sign-up sheets, or you can go to any of our websites and sign up. But anyways, we hope you'll all come to the fair. Then I wrote a second book, Breaking Trail, A Climbing Life, about how I went from a very overprotected childhood in Chicago to leading the first American expedition on Annapurna. And it took me 20 years to write Breaking Trail. It was a big therapy project, dealing with my childhood. And just as my daughter was starting college, I thought I better finish this book and maybe I can go back to science. In 1980, when Reagan was elected president, I dropped out of science because, he took the solar panels off the White House, and people who were doing really good research lost their grants. People don't realize he was very anti-science. And so I quit science in 1980. 2006, 26 years later, I'd written my book. My daughter was starting college. And I learned that the same tris we'd gotten out of kids' pajamas was back in the nation's furniture. And I remembered it took 3 months last time. So I thought, well, I'll spend about 3 months and see if I can solve this problem. And then maybe I wanted to walk across the Himalayas again. But so anyway, I ended up founding the Green Science Policy Institute, which is here in Berkeley. We're at Shattuck and Rose, between Safeway and CVS, above the Japanese restaurant. It's our office. And so we're scientists who write high impact papers and that have a purpose of changing policy for healthier products. And we bring people together, government, NGOs, business, academia, and then we do a lot of good communication. So the problem that we're trying to solve is there are more than 80,000 different chemicals on the market today. We only know about a handful of them. Production is going up all the time. They impact our health, our environment. And when you think it takes years to do the research necessary to regulate one chemical, it just seems like an overwhelming problem. And indeed, when a chemical is regulated, like brominated tris got regulated and we replaced it with chlorinated tris, was almost the same thing. So how to solve these problems? We came up with the idea of sorting all these chemicals into 6 classes, the wrong way, into 6 classes or families of chemicals that have similar structure, function, and harm, and saying that if chemicals are in these 6 classes, we should really not use them unless we need them. And so these are the 6 classes. And the PFAS, which we're going to be talking about in some detail today, and antimicrobials, flame retardants, bisphenols and phthalates, some solvents, and certain metals. And we have a website, 6classes.org, and there's a 4-minute video around each of the 6 classes, and you can go to 6classes.org, 6 times 4, 24 minutes. You can learn where the chemicals are, why they're harmful, and how to avoid using them. So it's a way in about half an hour to really learn about chemical harm and protecting your health. And now there are useful chemicals in these classes. You can't say never use them, but if a chemical is in this class, we say, is it really necessary? If you say to a mom, you can have a really nice stain repellent carpet, but that stain repellent chemical is going to be in your children's bodies for years to come and it's harmful, she might think she doesn't need a white shag carpet she can drop Coca-Cola on. Maybe a gray spotted carpet will work that doesn't need those chemicals. Or do we really need this function given the potential for harm? And if the really wants that white carpet, then let's find a safer alternative. So, tonight, as I said, we're going to talk about PFAS, which really are my very favorite class of chemicals because they're the worst. They are so bad, but they're also so useful. And the reason they're so useful and so bad is the bond between carbon and fluorine is the strongest bond in the periodic table. It never breaks. It takes the energy of lightning to break that bond. So if you have a PFAS chemical in the environment, it never breaks down, ever. They're forever chemicals. And the ones that have been studied have all been found to be harmful. So if you're making a decision, and PFAS chemicals are used to make Teflon, to make Gortex. So when you buy a Teflon pan, the manufacturer of that pan produces chemicals that will be on the planet forever and are harmful. So they are, but they're useful. They give the properties of stain repellents, water repellency. So, you have to only use them if they're really essential. And usually they're not essential. So I first learned about PFAS trekking in the Himalayas. And I was reading a book called, Stain Resistant, Non-Stick, Waterproof, and Lethal, The Hidden Dangers of C8. And C8 means 8 carbons surrounded by fluorines. And this book is the story of a DuPont plant in West Virginia that contaminated the Ohio River Valley, and tens of thousands of people's drinking water was contaminated. And it just happened on my trek was a scientist, an analytic chemist from Sweden who was a friend. She'd postdoced here and lived at my house, who studied PFAS. So I'd read in the book this horrible story and she'd say, yep, it's worse than that. So I came back from this trip, and this was 2013, saying, I have to do something about PFAS. And I thought, let's start a call of scientists talking to each other once a month from all over the world who study PFAS. And so I figured out who the most famous PFAS scientists were from all over the world and invited them to have a call once a month to talk about science and also policy. And they all said yes, because every scientist who studied it knew how bad it was, but nobody else knew. You'd look in the news then, there was nothing about PFAS, but the scientists knew. So we've been having these calls once a month since 2013, the first Wednesday of the month, 8 a.m. And everybody's gotten to know each other really well. And I have to say, an exciting part of the pandemic was they were all just phone calls, if you can remember when. And that now, I remember the first time we got to see the people and their pets and their kids and their wallpaper, so it is interesting. People you've been talking to for 8 years, that on Zoom, you get to see them all. So we've been talking once a week, and from that, we really learned a lot. Let's see, wrong direction. Anybody here seen the movie Dark Waters? Just a few people. So it's the story of the Ohio River Valley and a lawyer, Rob Bilott, who we work with, who is played by Mark Ruffalo in the movie. It's really an excellent movie. Anyway, it's the story of his incredible persistence to uncover this terrible contamination in the Ohio River Valley of tens of thousands of people, where from a plant that makes Teflon, they just dumped all the PFAS in the river, and people's drinking water was highly contaminated. And they won one lawsuit and took all the money to do health studies of the population. And from those health studies, they learned that the PFAS is associated with 3 kinds of cancer, high cholesterol, obesity, and more health problems are being found all the time. And PFAS is pretty much in all of us. Almost everybody has it from their drinking water, from their food. And the PFAS that contaminated the Ohio River Valley on the left is called C8, like in the book, 8 carbons surrounded by fluorines. And because it is extremely persistent, accumulates, is toxic, C8, they knew it caused harm as early as 1965. It took 50 years till 2015 to phase out C8. They stopped making it in 2015. And you know what the substitute is on the right? C6. Does that look like an improvement? It's virtually identical in structure, function, and as we're finding out, toxicity. But the chemical industry was promoting it. So all the manufacturers, the old carpets had C8, the new carpets had C6, the old food packaging C8. So they pretty much all switched to C6. So we as scientists all knew that C6 was equally bad, as was C4, C2, all of them. And so we wrote a statement, the MADRID Statement, which was signed by more than 200 scientists, on the harm of the whole class of PFAS. And then we did a lot of communication. So this story was covered in National Geographic and the New York Times. If you get really interested in PFAS, there's a wonderful series, the Teflon toxin in the Internet Intercept. And then this culminated in a New York Times magazine cover story, the lawyer who became DuPont's worst nightmare, remembering, about Rob Bilott. And that's the story that led to the movie Dark Waters. It was based on this New York Times story. So when I read this story, and it was so good. The guy who wrote it, I'm forgetting his name, but really good writer. And I remember I wrote him and I said, do you want to do more science writing? I know lots of great stories. Do you want to be on our mailing list? And he said, no, I wrote about this because I'm a novelist. I wrote about it because of the guy's character But I've gotten all these letters that I've never gotten things like this before, like the state of New York is now going to demand that the EPA do something about PFAS. So that story activated a lot of people to learn about PFAS, demand the EPA to take action, because nobody had defined it as hazardous and nobody had a level of what was safe and what wasn't safe. And so at the same time this was happening, in our scientist group, there were some EPA scientists who said, there's hundreds of places in the US where the drinking water is really high in PFAS, but we don't really know nobody has said what's harmful. So it looks really high, but we don't quite know what to do about it. And I thought, well, it would be really interesting to trace back to communities that have too much PFAS in their drinking water to what is the source. So I asked on my monthly call if anybody wanted to do a paper trying to figure out why these communities had contaminated drinking water. And there was a scientist named Elsie Sunderland at Harvard who had a student, Cindy who said was good at mapping, and she could map from the contaminated drinking water to try to see what the sources were. And so doing that, she figured out that the sources were industrial production places where they made Teflon and Gortex and other products, and also airports and military training areas, because PFAS is used as a firefighting foam to put out aviation fires. And so we were just about to write this paper when, because of that New York Times story, the EPA set a health advisory level, and they said, this is a safe level for PFAS. And when we took that level and looked at these contaminated communities, we realized 6 million people's drinking water was above the health level. And that's when PFAS started to be in the news and became a real political issue, and somewhat nonpartisan, because communities of both political stripes would have contaminated drinking water. And so legislators on both sides of the aisle would be concerned about that problem. So the level that the EPA had set is that 70 level there in the middle. Let's see, is there a light pointer here? I'm not sure, I won't try. But now more and more states are saying, well, really the right level shouldn't be 70 that's safe, it should be 14. So if the level is 14, it's not, if it's 70, there's 6 million people. If it's 14, it's more like 60 or 70 million people whose drinking water is contaminated. So this is a huge, huge problem. And to give you a couple examples of the problem, in Michigan, where they made hush puppy shoes, the leather was treated with Scotchgard, which is PFAS, and they dumped the leather scraps in fields, and then they built a suburb over those fields, and the drinking water in those homes was over 800 times the EPA health advisory level. And a lot of people in those communities had the cancer and the health effects associated with PFAS exposure. And so there are a lot of lawsuits. The state of Michigan sued the hush puppy manufacturer, and what is it? Wolverine paid the state of Michigan nearly $70 million for contaminating, the land of Michigan. But then Wolverine sued 3M, who made the PFAS, and didn't tell them. And they can't read it, but it said a settlement of $55 million that Wolverine paid. I mean, that 3M paid Wolverine. Anyway, there are lots of lawsuits now about PFAS. And another sad example, Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, the firefighting foam leached out from the base into the local water. And there was a second generation dairy farmer with a huge number of cows, and the milk and the cows and his family all became very contaminated, and he was having to dump thousands of gallons of milk every day. He couldn't sell it, and ultimately he had to kill his whole dairy, thousands of cows, because they were so contaminated with PFAS. So the PFAS level says up to 12,000 parts per trillion, where 70 is the health advisory level. 171 times. And they found that, meanwhile, in the local community. So getting clean drinking water is really expensive. This is in North Carolina, where there was a DuPont plant that contaminated the Cape Fear River Valley. And to the ways you can get those long chains out of the drinking water is with carbon filtration. And to build a plant, what was it? It was $46 million to build the plant and about $3 million to operate it every year to get the long chains out. But this was a chemical production plant with long chains, short chains, all kinds of PFAS, and they had to use another form called reverse osmosis, which gets everything out, but it's even more expensive. So for 25,000 customers, it was $99 million to build the plant, and then again, $3 million a year to operate it, which is a huge amount. And the thing to remember is this just gives people clean drinking water. It does not clean up the environment. The environment pretty much never gets cleaned up. The scientist who first discovered this contamination, who we work with, Detlef Knopp, he said that when the plant was running, and it rained in North Carolina, and the rain went through the trees, the level of PFAS increased. So what that means is that the PFAS from the smokestacks landed on the trees, and then when it rained, the rain would pick up PFAS. And so that means even if you're spending all that money getting clean drinking water, what about for people? What about the birds and the bees and the bats and all the creatures in the environment whose health is being harmed? So this is all very depressing. Everyone's looking sad. And the fact is PFAS is problematic, difficult to clean up, very expensive, maybe not even possible. So prevention is better. Prevention's always better, right? And the rest of my talk is going to be more optimistic. So now we're going to tell you some nice prevention stories, starting with science. So we wrote a paper. In fact, it started in Berkeley, where I said, I've heard that the wrappings in fast food and other kinds of pastries and things have PFAS. So we went and collected samples in Berkeley. This is no longer true, but we went to Cheese Board, and just the pastry bags had PFAS. And we went to Gregoire, and the paper, and when I told them, they gave me a free pizza. It was very nice of them. And at Gregoire, the wrappings, anyway, we found all over Berkeley PFAS in the packaging. This was about 2016, and it's all PFAS free now. We met the person who distributed, and it's all solved now, so no worries. But we wrote a paper. Then we got fast food samples, from McDonald's and Burger King's and Wendy's from around the country. I guess how many? Several hundred samples, and about half of them had PFAS. So we wrote a paper documenting that half the fast food wrappers had PFAS. And then Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut wrote a letter like this one's to the CEO of, I think this one's Burger King, anyway, to the CEOs of all the different fast food companies where we had found PFAS. So this is March 2017. And nobody answered the letters. But we later heard that as soon as this happened, as soon as our paper came out, McDonald's, Burger King, they all knew they had to find a substitute for PFAS. And they did. And they've all announced that they're out of all PFAS in their wrapping. It took a few years for them to find effective substitutes that were cost effective and worked. And like McDonald's said, they were mostly out of it within a year or two, but to get it out from all the McDonald's all over the world, they did that about 6 months ago. So it's a nice example of science, plus a lot of communication. This got a lot of news, the PFAS in the fast food wrappings. And I think I said the highest source of exposure for kids to PFAS used to be carpeting, because that PFAS is sprayed on the carpets to make them water and stain repellent. And so we invited the carpet industry from Dalton, Georgia to come to Berkeley, the Brower Center. We had a meeting there. And pretty much the whole carpet industry is based in Dalton, Georgia. There are about 10 major players, and they all came. They didn't come because of us, but we have a buyers club, which is Facebook, Google, the city of San Francisco, Genentech, Kaiser, all these big companies that are big purchasers want healthy environments for their workers and their patients. And they've all come together in what we call our buyers club, where they share information about reducing the use of these harmful chemicals in their products. And so it was more like Google said to the carpet people, you know, we buy a lot of carpets from you, come to Berkeley and learn from these scientists. So they all came, and we explained the science, because they'd all gone from C8 to C6 and thought they'd solved the problem. And they were a little bit hostile in the beginning, but they learned that they had not solved the problem going from C8 to C6. C6 was a big problem too. And to get out of it, they all had to agree to get out of it together, because they all sold to places like Home Depot and Lowe's, where all the carpeting was put together. Anyway, at the end of a one-day meeting, the whole carpet industry decided they would get out of PFAS, and they did. By January of 2020, they've all gotten out. And they were so happy. They thanked us. They lost liability. They gave us an award. And so that was amazing to me. I had no idea that in one day they would change and then follow through. There were other reasons. I think they were going to be sued, but they did it. So now carpets don't have PFAS. Unfortunately, if your carpet is from before, it may well have PFAS. Like my daughter's carpet has PFAS, sadly. Yeah, and we knew we'd succeeded when Home Depot announced they were phasing out selling rugs and carpets containing PFAS, because Home Depot couldn't announce that if it happened because the carpet companies all decided. It took them a year or two to get out of the PFAS, but they did. So another good story is Keen shoes. I don't know if anybody wears Keen water shoes, and they decided they wanted to be out of all PFAS. And so they looked through all their supply chain, and they discovered 101 places in all the different shoes they sold where there were PFAS. And 70 of them they determined they didn't need. So those 70 they stopped using right away. But they still had 31 more uses, and it took them 7 years and millions of dollars to find substitutes for those 31 uses, but they did. So Keen shoes are completely PFAS free. And Keen has been working to help move the outdoor industry. They had a full-page ad in the New York Times, maybe March 22nd of this year, which was World Water Day, saying it took us 7 years and millions of dollars, but they had a blog on just how to do it. We'll help you to do it more cheaply. We helped with the science on that, because the outdoor industry uses a lot of PFAS. So the most recent case is something that just happened in the last month, this June, which is the best example I think we'll ever have of science and policy working together. So this is a paper we wrote where we looked at PFAS in cosmetics. We looked at about 215 products, and about half of them we found PFAS. And if you think about direct path, so if you have PFAS, waterproof mascara, for example, mostly contain PFAS, and that would go into your eyes. It can go through your skin, you can breathe it. And then all those products on the right, the mascara, foundation, liquid lipstick, that they had the most. When it's dumped, it goes into landfills, but eventually ends up in drinking water, because remember, PFAS is forever. So this paper came out June 15th, and we did a huge communication campaign. And with much planning, the day it came out, we had bipartisan legislation called the No PFAS in Cosmetics Act in the House and the Senate. And it was Republicans and Democrats, and with the same wording. So if you have legislation that's in the House and the Senate and it's bipartisan and exactly the same wording, it has a reasonable chance of passing. So we'll see. We also had a big press conference, and we had 40 people from the cosmetics industry at our press conference, Sephora and Target, and that was a lot of work getting them there because we wanted them to hear, like the Senator Blumenthal, a fiery talk on how harmful PFAS is in cosmetics and how they should get it out, because they can move ahead of legislation and start to get it out. So, right, this is the data we found. The products with the highest amounts were liquid lipstick, foundation, and mascara, waterproof mascara. And in many cases, the PFAS was not labeled. So it's really up to the cosmetics industry. Wednesday, I'm doing a talk for about 150 cosmetics companies about our paper and how to move to safer substitutes. And we're hoping that, so the reason it was amazing is it was to get the paper to come out and have bipartisan legislation in the House and Senate the same day was like, I don't think that'll ever happen again. That was really, and our paper has had 55,000 downloads, which is the most in the history of the good journal we published it in fact. So it's, we got a lot of, it was covered in all the press. You may have heard about it, but it was even on Good Morning America, everything. So that was June 15th, not very long ago. So the good news is that we are moving away from PFAS in carpets, in food packaging, slowly in outdoor gear. The outdoor gear is a problem in cosmetics now, in firefighting foam. So, I mean, I think the word is out that PFAS is bad and we don't need it. And we are moving away. So if anybody starts to get excited about PFAS like I am, we have a website called PFOS Central that has the latest PFAS news, science, policy, events, jobs, whatever. Because, back when we started our group in 2013, there was like no PFAS news. And now there's just an avalanche of news and events. And so we have it all. We curate the most interesting papers and news articles at PFAS Central. And then the most popular page on PFAS Central is our PFAS free page, where we list PFAS free products and brands that do not contain any PFAS. And this was, there are a lot of these contaminated communities where people have been drinking this contaminated drinking water for even decades. And so they came to us and they said, we want to know about brands like Keen Shoes, or IKEA got all their PFAS out in 2015. So we want to know which brands don't have PFAS. So we put together this page on our website. So now I'm going to share my most glamorous slide ever. This is based on work on flame retardants, which I'm not talking about today, but Jerry Brown, when he was first governor, signed into law a requirement that led to all the furniture and children's product foam in California, and indeed the whole US and Canada, being 5% flame retardants. And then thanks to a lot of work we did and others, Jerry Brown too changed the law so furniture, children's products no longer have flame retardants. And I kind of led that effort. So based on that and other things, I got inducted into the California Hall of Fame. And on the far left, there's Robert Redford. And on the far right, there's Joan Baez, the most glamorous night of my life. And so that's what happens, do good work getting toxic chemicals out of products. So I got really well rewarded. So I'm just going to end by encouraging you. We have a table back there, and there are postcards of the 6 classes to remind you. So pick up a postcard, and I encourage you to take half an hour and watch these videos and learn where these harmful chemicals are. There's also a postcard for our PFOS Central website. And then we have copies of my 2 books, Breaking Trail and Annapurna, and some t-shirts, all sold by Sylvia, who's only been doing this for 45 years, right, Sylvia? Seriously, Sylvia dreamed up the t-shirts in 1977, and it's been helping out ever since. Everyone knows Sylvia. So we have monthly newsletters, and you can sign up on the table or sign up if you go to any of our websites. And feel free to email me, arlene@greensciencepolicy.org. So I'll just end by saying by limiting the use of PFAS, we can all have a healthier world. And you can, again, go to greensciencepolicy.org, PFAScentral.org. You can learn a lot more about reducing harm from PFAS and other toxic chemicals. And I hope you'll all sign up on our mailing list so we can stay in touch either monthly or quarterly. So quarterly is not too many newsletters. It's 3 or 4 times a year. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Arlene, for that wonderful presentation. I also want to second encouraging you all to take a look at the Green Science Policy Institute website and those videos. As she said, in 24 minutes, you can learn so much and both be incredibly depressed, but also inspired. So, and I think both is necessary. This is a very serious issue. Our timing on this topic couldn't have been better. I was delighted to see that the New York Times this morning published an article on PFAS, pointing out that in 2011, EPA knew about the harms of these chemicals and tried to redact information. It's a fascinating article. You can pull it up online. I encourage you to do so. A little bit of good news as well, that the Biden administration supposedly is making this a priority, but it would take people like Arlene to make that happen. So we are really, truly grateful for your efforts and all of your colleagues and all of those people who've been on those monthly phone and now Zoom calls for all those years. So there were a couple of questions in the chat, and then I'll open it up to questions here. So one question about fluoride on the supply side, are there not other ways for the companies that have been dependent on PFAS, other chemicals, other type of chemical chains that would have similar effectiveness?
For virtually all uses, there are alternatives. And in fact, in Europe and in the US, so, well, in Europe, they're moving forward. In the US, there's a lot of interest in stopping the all unessential use of PFAS, which is most of it. You know, there might be a few essential uses, perhaps medical uses, but, you know, you don't have to have a Teflon fry pan. You don't have to have a Gore-Tex jacket. You certainly don't have to have your fast food wrapped in PFAS or a lot of building materials. So there are alternatives. And if the government could succeed in actually banning the use, then people would find alternatives.
Right. Yeah. And then ultimately, that's what it's going to take, is probably both the carrot and a stick approach. But,
exactly. Yeah. But the state of Maine just passed some legislation around stopping the use in a lot of products. We worked through the National Defense Authorization Act, which for example, told the military that they couldn't use PFAS firefighting foam, which is really big. And this year we list that they shouldn't use PFAS in clothing and cosmetics for military purchasing. Government purchasing is a big way to affect change. And so that's one thing that we've been working on with other NGOs.
Exactly. One of the other questions was about medical use. Are there PFAS in any known over-the-counter medicines like eye drops?
I've heard that, but somebody we worked with tested a lot of eye drops and didn't find it. So I don't know the answer. There are patents for it, but I don't know if it's used in eye drops. Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Okay. Are there questions here in our audience? We'll start right in the front, Barbara.
I was curious about water bottles that we might be carrying, especially if we're hiking or something more substantial than just the ordinary plastic water bottle. I have to admit, I just drink ordinary tap water. I'm wondering if I should do that.
Oh, tap water is usually fine. These are just certain communities and people should be notified. Our Bay Area water is good, I think.
We have containers, plastic containers, supposedly water, bottled water. Should they be removed from those plastic containers and put it in something else just for safety purposes?
Well, it's a different question. I don't think there's PFAS in the water bottles. You know, a lot of people prefer metal or glass. Certainly if it's cooking in your car, you know, I don't think you want to leave plastic water bottles in your car because there are additives in plastic that are potentially harmful. So that's why they have clean canteens, you know, that are metal. So I think metal and glass is probably better, but yeah, and certainly single-use plastic. You know, we do not want to have any single-use plastics at all. So.
Right. It's just another reason not to, especially in this area where our EB mud is quite wonderful, just out of the tap. But just another reason to never buy water. The most expensive thing you can buy is bottled water, I think.
Silly.
It's crazy, but we recognize in some communities, but then some of those same communities think they're buying safe water and they're doing exactly the opposite. So
I was struck by how much it was not meeting the law, that you just moved in, brought a whole bunch of big chain and manufacturers and distributors, and they changed it. Did you say 3 months on one day on one?
Well, that was amazing, the carpet industry. I think there were other things going on.
So let me just repeat the question for the Zoom audience, which was, it seemed amazing that there was so much change that was motivated by one day of meeting by the carpet industry. But of course, it wasn't just that. It was...
Well, there's a long process, but I think business can change much faster.
Well, it seemed as though you had the science out there, but that it was accepted. I wondered if it was why they were concerned about consumer reputation, like Facebook, medical places, or whether they were concerned about liability suits.
I think all of it, and also there was talk. The state of California is it hasn't happened till now, and they've been out of the business was way ahead of it. But California, and there was somebody at the meeting from the Department of Toxic Substances who said, you know, we're starting the process of listing carpets with any PFAS as products of concern. And they just finished the process recently. 2 years ago, the carpet industry was out. But I think knowing that government is moving, they get ahead of it. So that's the hope with cosmetics. That's why I really wanted the cosmetics industry to be there to hear that the people, you know, these senators and Congress people were really going to have no PFAS in cosmetics. And hopefully they'll look at in fact, I can't remember, but because the young woman who's our communications person, who's really great, she was really excited because this cosmetics brand that's a Kardashian brand, apparently they were going to reformat to a cleaner variety, and a reporter who she knew said, well, what are you going to do about PFAS? And they said, oh, PFAS, we're going to be out of all PFAS. And so that just happened a few days ago. So she was thrilled. She said, look, it's a very trendy brand for probably junior high school or something. Anyways, and I can't remember the name. Nobody knows the name of the trendy. Do you know the name, Jonas? Kylie Cosmetics. Thank you. Jonas works with us at the Institute.
Kylie Cosmetics?
Yeah. But and now it's, you know, based on our campaign that they were going to be out of PFAS. So that's really a good thing. And so we're hoping that the industry will move that way. You know, the legislation may or may not pass. It may take a long time, but they can turn on a dime. I remember those talks, they were originally like 15-minute talks, and in about 2013 we gave one on antimicrobials in personal care products, and the next day Target called and said, we had no idea we have this in our Target brand and we're going to get it out. And they got it out. They said, don't tell anyone for a year. It'll take us a year to get it out of the supply chain, but they got it out. Meanwhile, the FDA in, I think, 1972 wrote a report saying that this antimicrobial was harmful and had no benefit. And it took them, I think, 42 years. They banned it like in 2016. And so the government, you know, took 42 years, and Target kind of did it overnight. So because government, it's really hard. They have the chemical industry after them. but a company can just say, we're not going to put that stuff in our products anymore. And
which actual gives us a lot of hope, the power of consumerism. We really can elect change with our pocketbooks. So keep that in mind. A couple of other questions from the Zoom audience. Are they using PFAS in the retardants that they are fighting forest fires with?
no, as far as I know, I don't know for sure, but it's used to put out aviation fires, oil and gas fires, but
Not forest fires.
I hope not. That would be terrible.
Yes, let's all hope not.
The red you see is just a dye for them to know where it's going. It turns out that it is a hydrocarbon, and if it lands on water, like on a creek, it's bad for the creatures in the creek, and they try very hard not to drop it on streams or water supplies. But it's more the viscosity on the water. It's not a PFAS, as far as I know. You know, I can't swear for sure, but I'm pretty sure.
There's a question about PVC. Does it have any similar harmful chemicals?
PVC, that's polyvinyl chloride, and it's used for making
Everything.
many things. And the manufacture is somewhat problematic. And indeed, in the manufacture of PVC, some of the processes do use some PFAS to help manufacture PVC. So PVC is not a great material. But it's not
Sort of a secondary harm rather than primary.
It's not as bad as PFAS, but it's not great. So I think somebody there has been raising
Good
his
to
hand
know.
very.
Jim.
Yeah, I saw that antimicrobials were one of the classes, and I immediately think hand sanitizer. All the hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer actually does not have antimicrobials. It's a mixture of alcohol and other, because we are all making it. What is it? Alcohol. It's mostly
Alcohol, glycerin.
and aloe. It's aloe vera.
Aloe vera.
It's aloe and alcohol.
Are there any over the products?
There was a lot of excess use of antimicrobials because of the pandemic. Things called, so back to when in 2016, the FDA did phase out most of these problematic antimicrobials that they'd known about since 1972, but they did phase them out. And triclosan, triclocarban. And I walked across the street, to CVS, and I looked on the bottles, and they'd given a year's warning, so they weren't in the bottles. But instead, they had the regrettable substitute, which are called QATs, quaternary ammonium salts. And those we now have a group of scientists from all over the world who study those, and we're writing a paper, and those are pretty problematic, unfortunately. Because, something that's antimicrobial that kills microbes, you don't really want in your water and your food and your breast milk, and that's where it ends up. And so it turns out when you wash your hands with soap and water, that's the best. If you use antimicrobial soaps, to have the antimicrobial effect, you'd have to wash your hands for about 2 minutes. Nobody does. So it just goes down the drain and ends up in the sediment, and the little fish eat it and the bigger fish eat it, and it comes back to us. So, and antimicrobials are used in all kinds of building materials just for marketing, like your countertops and your doorknobs. They do not have to be antimicrobial. It's all marketing. Right. But the chemicals then are in the environment. They're very persistent. So they're a big problem. So unfortunately, we switched from one antimicrobial to the next, but not the hand sanitizer.
Our mothers and grandmothers knew best, just use soap and water.
But they were doing things like fogging, spraying quaternary ammonium salts in schools and hospitals, which is terrible, and not recommended by the World Health Organization, recommended against. But people, with the pandemic, particularly in the beginning, when nobody knew what to do, right. And let's just, because, there was definitely overuse.
Right. You had a question. Question was, what about in sunscreens? Are there PFAS?
I'm not aware of it, but I can't swear to it. They have been found in a number of personal care products. The good news is the No PFAS in Cosmetics Act cosmetics include all these personal care products. So if that were to pass, it would ban the use in shampoos, sunscreens, a whole wide variety. And it would be a miracle, but it's very promising that it's bipartisan in the House and the Senate. So we'll see.
And where is it in the chain of
It's got to
legislation?
be going through committees, because I've just recently said, what can we do to help? And the
Right.
thing is educate people on the health committee. And, the staffers who do this, they're doing so many bills,
Sure.
so many things.
Sure.
So I know just right now we're thinking about doing more education.
The reason I ask is that all of you here and all of you listening, write to your congresspeople and say, this is something that's important to us. If it's important to us, it's going to be important to our legislators. So again, don't forget the power of the consumer. It is very, very strong. Doug, you had a question.
Actually, two. We thought we were smart when we got a nonstick frying pan that was labeled no PFAS. And I'm wondering if we were smarter if they substitute something else.
Ooh.
And the other question is instead of labeling, we can kind of understand what we're getting.
So question about labeling,
So that's
when
it.
it says it's not PFAS and it's
That's-
Teflon, what is it?
The great question. So if it says no PFAS, PFAS, that is good. If it says there's no PFOA, PFOA, which is what they mostly said, PFOA is the C8 that stopped being made in 2015.
So neither.
It didn't, what did it say?
No PFAS, no PFOS.
No PFOA, no PFAS.
Well, it might have said no PFOA, no PFOS. So PFOA and PFOS, that's terrible alphabet soup. They're the two that stopped being made. So when they advertise, they don't have something that no longer is being made. You have to say, what do they have? So it's unfortunate. So if it's PFOA or PFOS, that's not helpful. That doesn't mean anything. Oh, it did. Okay. If it said no PFAS, that's a good thing.
That's good. And I guess,
Is there a labeling law then is that a thing to work on? Because how would one know?
It's really hard. Manufacturers fight labeling desperately.
and I wonder, does Teflon as a registered trademark, is that by definition?
Teflon is, as far as I know, always problematic.
Yeah.
But there are alternatives from Scandinavia, the non-stick, that are PFAS free. One thing, if we have a minute just to explain, is Teflon is a polymer. It's a big molecule, and it's actually using your Teflon pan. If you don't heat it too high, or it won't make you sick. The problem is the manufacturer. So the town in Ohio and West Virginia were contaminated from the manufacture of Teflon.
So that's actually an important question. If people have Teflon pans,
If they use them carefully, just like a Gore-Tex jacket, but the manufacturer. So I always
Right.
say, you can use your pan or your jacket, but don't buy another one.
there you go. Right. Oh, that's
Yeah,
a question.
you-
If you throw it away, is there some risk to
There's
the
not
environment?
much choice, but what do you do? Yeah, like what? Yes, it's a problem. What do you do with these things? How do you
Probably use it as
dispose of
long as
them?
possible. Susan?
If we're going to build a deck, is the redwood that's treated really problematic? Is the fake
Treated with what?
looking, well, I don't know. I'm not concerned about even building a deck because of how they would either treat the wood or how they would, seal it.
So the question is about deck
think
materials, what
Well,
they would-
redwood is really, I don't think I think redwood's really good. It's probably expensive.
No, so there is pressure treated lumber that has chemicals in it, which is not redwood. That's another topic. But redwood qua redwood is a fine material, has its own anti-insecticide qualities. So look carefully at what you and your contractor might seal it with, but
And the stains, would that be a solvent? And would that the synthetic wood look perfect? Or is it made out of wood?
it depends. Some of the materials are actually, in fact, recycled plastic bags. So that is one of the very few things that plastic bags can be useful for right now. So I would rather have them in my deck than floating around and having the critters eating them. So that's my personal opinion.
And the
But
rain won't lead it into the soil.
no. It has been melted. It has basically been cooked into a new form factor. So it's not going anywhere.
So you should have your duck.
Yes. Any other questions? Well, if not, I'm going to thank Arlene heartily for this presentation. And thank all of you for coming here tonight, both in person and online. It's such a pleasure to have our club hearing voices, hearing applause, and seeing your smiling faces. So we won't be doing anything for August. We will have a club dinner for September. If you are not already members, I hope you will consider joining. And then in the first Mondays of October and November, we will return to fireside presentations. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.